Welcome everybody to the first of a 5-week series on spiritual business, working with purpose rather than business as usual. And through this series, under the Hub feature in their wealth section, we'll be talking about what is the cause of health, of wealth, and creating a world that works for everybody. Our topic this morning, specifically as first session in our 5-week series, is greatest atrocity committed against human beings and how to surmount it. And what we're going to look at, first of all, in our series is that we as human beings are creators. And as creators, we create the results that happen in our lives. But our world has taught us something different. Our world has taught us that no, actually, you're not responsible for everything that goes on in your life. In fact, all the things that you don't like are somebody else's fault. And, of course, we have a language that says, you made me angry, you made me sad, you made me afraid, you made me fail, it's all your fault. And we play this game, and our brain actually shows us a world where we see that other people are responsible for what happens in our lives. And, of course, we have pain over what they do to us. And we pretend that it is actually they who do that. We buy into this idea that it's all about somebody else. And so that atrocity is that of being convinced that we're not creators, that we don't have power over our lives, that somebody else has power to create something in our world and in our lives. And so we have a question that we often ask in our workshops to kind of give us an edge or a way of seeing through the evidence that the mind shows us. And to see through that, I ask the question, if they're the one with the problem, why are you the one with the pain? Pain is an internal experience, and our internal experiences are caused internally. They cannot be caused by anything in the world. However, those things in the world can trigger our pain, and because of the way the mind works, it's essentially an evidential device, which means that it only gives us the evidence that we ask for. Our mind will hallucinate a reality that shows us that somebody else is the problem in our lives. So we're talking about the evidential nature of the mind, and in essence, when we pretend that we're not responsible for what happens in our lives, our minds show us images and pictures of something that never happened. Now, to get a practical angle on that one, just ask yourself the question, have I ever been accused of something that I didn't do? Have I ever been accused of saying something that I didn't say? And, of course, when I ask that question in the workshop, everybody puts their hand up. And then I'll ask, well, how many times has that happened to you? Once, twice, and basically most everybody agrees an infinite number of times. So someone around us hallucinates us doing or saying something that causes them pain and blames us. You made me. And they actually believe that, though it's really clear to us that we did no such thing. It's clear that they're living in an hallucination. Now, most people call that a lie, but in fact, when people accuse you of doing something you didn't do, saying something you didn't say, they're not lying. They're telling you the truth. They saw you say, saw you do what they said you did. They heard you say what they said you said. How is that possible? Because the mind provides the evidence demanded, and if someone is in a painful situation, denying responsibility for their pain and telling their minds to show them that somebody else is the cause of their pain, in fact, the mind will show them that someone else is the cause of their pain, even though it didn't happen. And so if there's something that we've denied and hidden from ourselves, and someone comes along and triggers that which we've denied, that information that we've denied will be used not in its true and original form, but will actually be used to show us that someone else is the cause of this. We'll use that data. There's some interesting information that comes out of Harvard University that shows that in a time frame where there are 10,000 measurable units of electrical activity going on in the brain, 10,000 brain cells firing, the maximum amount of information that the mind can use in generating or building the world that we see is 9 bits, a tiny, tiny fragment of what's actually happening inside of us. And it's been estimated in that same time frame there are approximately 20 trillion bits of information potentially available from the world. So we look at information in a 9-bit mind, and we think we're looking at what's going on in the world, and the truth is we're looking at what's going on inside of us. And the reason why we see somebody else as the cause of our pain is because we refuse to own that we create what causes our pain. And so that cause remains hidden from us and embodied in someone else's image in our minds. And so when we start to take responsibility as opposed to what many people interpret it to be as, you mean I'm to blame? You mean this is all my fault, this terrible thing that happened? No, we're not saying you're to blame. We're not saying that it's your fault. We're simply saying you're responsible. Notice if you've been through it 87 different times with 42 different people, you're the one that was there every time. What shows up in your mind always shows you, the realities that show up in your mind always tell you more about the content of your mind than the world that you think you're looking at. Unless you tell your mind to suppress something. And then you don't see your own content accurately. It always comes up in a distorted form. And of course, the whole lesson of asking the question, how many have been accused of doing or saying something that you never said or did, is to recognize that we do exactly the same thing with other people. When people show up in our lives and trigger things in us that we've refused to take ownership of, we blame them. So when the last time you said to somebody, why did you say thus and so, or do this or do that? And they said, what are you talking about? That never happened. What in essence you're doing is that you're pretending something that's going on inside of you is about somebody else. And the first step in cleaning this atrocity up, that is the pretense that we're not creators, is to take ownership, to take responsibility. And responsibility doesn't mean guilt, fault, blame. In fact, responsibility is a tool for accessing previously hidden parts of your own mind. So once you give your mind permission, the mind, as I said earlier, being an evidential device, cannot show you evidence that you're not willing to look at. And so the denial of a certain event, the denial of a certain responsibility, tells the mind to hide that. Responsibility becomes the key to having access to that information once again. And so what we're, in essence, in order to move into that level of living, of doing business, of having health and wealth that is possible for a human being, cannot be achieved until we're willing to take that level of responsibility. And of course, once you decide to take that level of responsibility, you're going to start to see parts of your mind that have been hidden your whole life. It is not necessarily a pleasant process, which is one of the reasons why, rather than take responsibility and look at their lives, most people would rather drug themselves to death. That's why I just heard some statistics last night that 1 out of 3 people in the United States is on some kind of antidepressant. Now, that's a prescription type of antidepressant, but if you go beyond that and you look at nicotine and sugar and all the other suppressants that people use, the mechanics of the mind are shut down by all of these drugs and items that inhibit the movement of energy within us. And if we're inhibited in the movement of energy, then we don't have a possibility of moving fully, freely as the creative beings that we were designed to be. So responsibility becomes the first step in cleaning up a life that holds the pretense that somebody else could possibly be responsible for what's going on inside of you. Once you start to see those things that are blocks, then you start to move in the direction of cleaning up those blocks. And there are a whole series of tools that move us in that direction. And over the period of the next few weeks, we'll be talking about some of those tools, and ultimately culminating the last week with forgiveness. By the way, that last week of our 5-week series, we're going to be doing live from the Hub Conference in San Diego. And so we're probably, and we don't have an absolute confirmation on it yet, but we're probably going to change the time from 10 o'clock on that last call to 12 noon or perhaps 12:30 Pacific time. So, but we'll keep you tuned as things move forward there. But we're going to move in the direction of looking at forgiveness as the solution to our dilemma. And in the ancient Aramaic language, forgiveness has nothing to do with letting other people off the hook for what's going on inside of you. Our culture teaches us a Greek idea of pardoning, and when we pardon, what in essence we're saying is, I have something painful happening inside of me. Of course it's all your fault, but I'll forgive you. I'll let you off the hook for what my physiology is producing, which of course does absolutely nothing to address what's happening in your physiology, and doesn't change what's happening in your physiology. If we want a life of true health and well-being where we're fully empowered, we have to address those issues that create the blocks inside of us and remove those blocks. In the ancient Aramaic, the word forgive has nothing to do with letting other people off the hook, and you would never be invited to forgive another or to forgive yourself for anything. In that culture, if you were in pain, you would be handed a tool called forgiveness, which you would use to address and, in essence, delete your pain and be finished with it. You might also be invited to pardon someone else if they've done something that's off base, and in that process, you might hold them accountable. Living in the world of forgiveness as it comes from the Aramaic has nothing to do with laying down and taking others' abuses. In fact, it empowers you. If someone needs to be held accountable for what they're doing, it empowers you to hold them accountable and to move forward in your life as a very powerful creator. And that's the direction that we're heading with our conference, this 5-week series. And I'd like to just open the line or ask anyone who might have a question or a comment or a thought at this point to just hit *6 and unmute yourself. When you're finished with your comments, so we'll have a clear recording, if you would hit *6 again, and we'll address your comments. But I'd like to just hear from anyone who has any comments and see how this fits for you as a foundation for where we're going.
This is Linda. I have a quick question about, you made a little bit more of a direct translation in Greek. What would be a more direct translation in Aramaic for forgiveness? Is there
Well, that's in essence what I'm saying. In Aramaic, forgiveness doesn't mean I'm going to let you off the hook. That's a Greek idea. In Aramaic, the word forgive is the tool with which you change what's going on inside of you. And that's where we're going to head toward the last week of the series is, what is the technology and how do you forgive as it was taught in the Aramaic language?
Thanks.
So forgiveness is the tool that you address and change what's happening inside of you. It isn't about letting others off the hook because of what's going on inside of you.
Okay.
That make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Great. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, well then let's just move forward with some more ideas on.
Michael?
Go ahead.
I was just wondering about how can you get to the point where you can recognize that you've been projecting to other people for your thoughts?
Good question. And when you look at this idea, William, when we deny and hide things from ourselves, the act, and that's a good point, the act of putting what's in our minds into our brain's image of someone else is that of projection. And what will happen is there will always be pain attached to what we're seeing, to what we're experiencing. On an energetic level, when you look at the human form, and this was the next topic I was going to move into, when you look at the human form, it is not physical. Listen to Einstein. Einstein says, on such things as matter, we have been all wrong. What we have heretofore called matter is energy, energy whose vibrations have been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. Matter does not exist. What we have, somebody's got, is not muted. If you could mute yourself. We're hearing something in the background. So when you recognize that we're not material beings, that we're energetic beings, the minute that we move into denial, we've tagged whatever we're denying with an energy that is of a negative nature relative to our field. And so wherever we store that energy in our fields, there is pain. It can be physical pain, it can be mental pain, it can be emotional pain. And so that was a good question, thank you. And the pain that we experience is the result of putting an energy into tissue where it does not belong. And every time that we're in pain, pain has this absolutely wonderful purpose, and its purpose is to make our ears grow, to get us to start to listen. And what the average human being in our culture does when they're in pain is the exact opposite of taking responsibility. They want to blame everybody else. And it just doesn't work. If you think about the human being and kind of a starting point for really getting a handle on this experientially is to understand what the human being is. And without having to get people to unmute themselves to answer, one of the things that we'll do in our workshops often is we'll ask the question, how many have ever held a newborn child? And this is a question we've asked of tens of thousands of people over the years. And 100% of the time, when we ask people who've held a newborn to describe the essence of that newborn in a single word, the response is always some variation on the theme of love. We get answers like beauty and awesome and presence and purity and sweetness. And that's the essence of the human being. When we are in denial and there's something we need to be taking responsibility for, in order to see it and clean it up, our physiology gives us a signal. And the signal is, ouch, that hurts. Now, our mind may be showing us that our pain is caused by someone else because the mind is the greatest liar of all, but our physiology doesn't lie. When our physiology is in pain, again, physical, mental, emotional, it's because there's an energy there that doesn't belong there. And the only way you can delete or remove that energy is to be able to uncover it. You can't uncover it while you're blaming somebody else, while you're pretending that someone else has creatorship over your life. So undoing this fallacy that we're not creators and owning creatorship for what happens allows us to start to see truly and fully inside of us. Another question that we'll often ask in our workshops is, how many have ever done something that you regret? And just take a second, if you would, and think about any single event that you've experienced in your life where you've done something that you regret. And identify what you were feeling when you did whatever it was that you now regret. And what we do when we get people offering their answer to that question in our workshop is we make another list on the board. The first list describes the essence of the human being, the newborn. And it's always some variation on the theme of love. When we start a second list on the board, and we usually put this one on the right side of the board, and we call it living from the left side to the right side, when we are doing something that we regret, the answer that comes from our audiences is always some variation on the theme of hostility, or fear. We hear things like vengeance and rage and sadness and grief and fear and pain and greed and all sorts of variations on that theme. And whenever we have some form of hostility or fear going on inside of us, again, though our mind shows it's about somebody else, we're the one that's feeling it, and we're actually working with. The reason why we can pretend what's going on inside of us is outside of us is because we're working with corrupted data. Whenever human physiology is expressing hostility or fear, it is expressing through corrupted data in the mind. And that data is what needs correction. Pain is its marker. So thank you for that question. Great one. Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
Michael, I'm having trouble, and I hope you get the essence of my question, but when in an event, if you're projecting or if it's hard to know if you're projecting or if you're making somebody accountable, holding somebody accountable.
Well, the idea there would be that if you are in a connected space, connected to love, then you're going to be able to hold somebody accountable. If there's hostility or fear, your mind is using corrupt data, you can't hold somebody logically accountable. 2,000 years ago in the Aramaic, they said, why are you trying to take the speck out of your brother's eye while you have a beam in your own? And in essence, what that means is that if you've got hostility or fear, if you've got pain going on, you're working out of corrupt data. You've got to clean up your own pain before you start trying to hold somebody else accountable or trying to fix somebody else. So the question there would be, are you in a fully connected state of love in your original nature, your essence? If you are, then you're going to be able to speak responsibly and logically to hold someone else accountable for their behavior. Now, another marker for the idea that you're playing a blame game is that you want to punish someone. If punishment is involved, I want to hurt you for the hurt that I've had, then that's another marker for I'm still working out of corrupt data. As opposed to, I want to bring resolution. I want to bring forward something that cleans up the dilemma that's between us, and I'm inviting you to take responsibility for your part in it as I'm taking responsibility for my part in it. And the marker for that is, am I connected to love? If I'm connected to love instead of any form of hostility, fear, or punishment, then I know that I'm in a space where I can be moving in the direction of accountability with others rather than the old blame game. Does that make sense of your question?
Yes, that makes perfect sense.
Cool. Any other thoughts?
Hi, Michael. It's Sharon.
Hi, Sharon. How are you, young lady?
I'm doing well. I am teaching in an urban district, and it is extremely challenging for me. And the last day, I have a parent conference on Monday, and it's supposed to be on Friday, but the parent never came in. So God delayed this, so I have this information as I go into this.
Could you slow down just a little bit? I'm having a little trouble understanding you.
Did you hear anything?
Yes. I heard that you had a parent conference and that the parent didn't show up.
Right. So it's probably be rescheduled on Monday. And your last chunk of information was, I think, key of how I can help me and the child and the parent get to resolve this. It's just the language helps to separate out how do I close the gap versus how do I get this kid, how do I get, this kid in trouble for the chaos he's been causing for the last 3 weeks. Just that language is helping me separate out my perception of what's been, quote, done to me versus how to close the gap between what's happening now, both him and me, and where we need to go for success. So just that language is starting to kind of get some different brain cells firing, so I thank you.
That's great. That's great. We have a young lady who's worked with us for the last 20-some years doing this work, and she taught in the Dayton, Ohio inner city school system. And pretty rough district, pretty rough time. And she taught kindergarten and grade 1. And in taking responsibility and really being able to embody responsibility, her name is Julie Haverstick. She's actually written a book on this work for teachers and parents working with children, for the children themselves, with lesson plans and all, and age-appropriate vocabulary and such. It's called Healing Children, Loving Children, and is available on our website, whyagain.com. But what Julie would do over the years was she would do her work. You know, she had some challenges as a kid when she was in school, and when she started to get out of the denial and projection, she'd start to see that, oh, these kids are repeating behaviors that were my challenges when I was a kid. And she would actually call me on a Tuesday morning or whatever and say, I've taken a well day off. Yesterday was hell at school, and I'm taking a day, and, the forgiveness process, we have a worksheet for doing the forgiveness process, and you can, we're going to go into that in the last week of our series, but if you want to get an explanation of that process and the actual worksheet, you can go to whyagain.com, whyagain.com, and go to download worksheets, and you can download Chapter 24 from my book, Why Is This Happening to Me Again, and the worksheet process. But she would do 35 of those worksheets in a day. She'd take a day off of school to do her work around that before she'd go back and confront the child with the child's behavior. And then oftentimes she'd end up with the parent in the classroom and teaching the parent the work of forgiveness around the issues with their child. Because a child basically works out of, more so out of the energies around them than out of the persona that most adults work out of. We talk about the word personality. The word personality means a mask. And most of us develop our masks through our childhood, but the young child works more off of an energetic level. Kind of a tongue-in-cheek line that I'll oftentimes deliver in my workshops is that I'll ask the question, how many have ever raised a child and noticed that having a child is like having your unconscious mind hanging out in true living color and Dolby sound. And they'll bring everything you've never dealt with up. And as a teacher, of course, you've got 20 or 30 kids in there. You're going to get every issue you've ever had in your life showing up in that classroom. And the end result, after doing this work for 20-some years in the classroom, actually Julie retired a couple of years ago, but the last 3 or 4 years, the school system she was in, it was a fairly large school, and there were 2 or 3 either kindergartens or grade 1s in the school that she taught in. And the last several years, her principal would give her all of the learning disabled and behavior disordered children, which of course was quite a load. And she would go to her principal and say, why don't you take some of these kids and spread them around? There are other teachers teaching this grade level. Why don't you spread them around? And his reply was, when they come out of your classroom, they're not learning disabled and behavior disordered. Because she would work with them with the tools. She would work with the parents with the tools. And there's one particular case where she had a child who had been kicked off of the school buses permanently. This is a kid in grade 1 and had been removed from 2 schools, and they brought him into her classroom. This is a child at a grade 1 level. He came into the classroom, and his behavior was that of getting down on his hands and knees like a dog and going around the classroom, literally biting, and I don't mean play biting, I mean really seriously biting the ankles of the other children in the classroom. That was his behavior on the first day of school. 6 weeks later, after working with this child, having the mother in and working with the child with the forgiveness process, He was the model child in the classroom, and he was helping the other children to do the forgiveness process as it's taught in the RMA. They're the kind of changes that take place. But the first thing that Julie had to do was she had to do her own work around with the children, the hostilities and fears, the old realities that the children brought up for her. And that's a tough lesson to get when we're confronted with some really bizarre behaviors, which, of course, our world today is showing us some pretty bizarre behaviors. But the first order of business for someone who's really, truly going to act and function as a real creator in the world is they're going to have to do their own work. They're going to have to face everything in them that is unlike the presence of their true being, which is love, every hostility and fear. And once they are able to do that, then they can come forward as the being they were designed to be and show up powerfully and show up in clarity and become a healing force in the world rather than one who creates more chaos. Those in hostility and fear always create more chaos. And so this work is really about undoing chaos. And of course, Hub, one of the things that excites me about Hub is that when I look historically, if you do a study of the way the world has worked for several thousand years, in essence, it's been run by a vision of hostility and fear globally. We've been at war, and in the last 100 years, we have killed in excess of 200 million people. And so the vision that has driven people has been that of hostility and fear and vengeance. And people have been coerced to support that with their lives, with their finances. And one of the things that really excites me about Hub is that this is the first time on planet Earth where a vision based in love has the opportunity to be fully and cooperatively funded instead of people being coerced to fund war. And that vision is going to be empowering to everybody that it touches globally and undoing this world of hostility and fear and really truly bringing love forward into the communities where formerly insanity has governed and perhaps governed for thousands of years. Some generation has to step up and say, I'm going to take responsibility. You know, if you look at the wars that are going on, everybody's got a reason. You did this to my family, so I'm going to do it to you. I don't care whether you're in Ireland or the Middle East or Africa. You know, everybody's justified. But sooner or later, somebody has to step forward in being instead of out of their old pain and out of their old trauma. And as they come forward in being, they come forward as a creator called love. And they literally become a space that starts to dissolve this insanity of hostility or fear. And that is what's going to undo all of the atrocities that have happened on planet Earth and allow us to step forward as the beings that we are, fully empowered, creative beings of love. And I heard somebody unmute themselves. Does that mean somebody else has a question or comment, thought? Okay, well, let's go back then to...
Hi, Michael. I'm on now. I didn't know the routine. What does HUB stand for?
HUB is Humanity Unites Brilliance. And if you go to our website, if you go to WHYAGAIN, WHYAGAIN.com, and you go over to the right side and look down the menu, you'll see HUB explanation. And on our website, there are a couple of recordings of me explaining. There are hour-long recordings of me explaining the HUB process. You can tap into those, and it'll tell you the whole story of HUB. And then you can just look at the links that are there. You can sign up or participate with HUB.
Thank you.
Delighted. Thanks for being here. Anyone else have a question or comment? So let's take a look then on a deeper level at this idea of us being energetic beings. And again, that quote from Einstein that tells us that we're energy instead of physiology, instead of being physical. And in fact, there's nothing physical in the world. And people will say, well, gee, Michael, if there's nothing physical, how come when I clap my hands together, they don't just pass through each other? They must be solid. Well, if you think about it, and you understand the physics of it, the reason why our hands don't pass through each other and appear to be solid to each other is because they are matching energy fields, and matching energy fields create interference patterns. And it's easy to imagine if I made, let's say, my left hand out of radio waves and went to clap my hands together, what would happen? Of course, we all know if my left hand were made out of radio waves and my right hand is my normal hand, my left hand would pass right through the right hand when I clap them together. Why? Because there's a part of us that really knows that we're just energy, that we're not physical solid beings. We know that radio waves pass right through us. We can't be solid if a radio wave can pass through us. There's a lot of space in there. In fact, there's certainly far more space than there is anything else. And if you take that example of clapping hands together one step further, if I made both of my hands out of radio waves, what would happen? Though there's nothing solid about a radio wave, my hands would appear solid to each other again because of the interference patterns created by the radio waves. If you go back into the ancient Aramaic language, that language, which is the native language, interestingly enough, of at least five, of the world's major religions. And that language, instead of being a theological language, and many have turned it into religions, is actually a physics language. And they were talking about how energy systems work. And the term that represents putting an energy into your structure that does not belong in your structure in that ancient Aramaic language is an archery term. And when you use that term, when you fired at the target, the scorekeeper on the archery range would yell, "Sin," when you miss the target. It's got nothing to do with who we are. That word sin is actually an archery term that means off the mark. When you and I, beings of love, take an energy that's less than love, an energy of hostility or fear, and put it into our physiology, in the Aramaic culture they would call that sin. You've engaged in something that's off the mark. And the whole idea of it in its original sense, as opposed to this culture which tells us that we should become identified as sin, as sinners, in the Aramaic, it actually simply meant, try again, do something different. This is an energy that doesn't belong in your physiology. And then when they followed it up and said the wages of sin is death, they were saying that if you put enough energy into your physiology that doesn't belong there, because these energies that are off the mark degrade physiology, sooner or later your body's going to fall apart and you're going to die. It wasn't a threat that, God's going to get you for your sins or anything like that. It was just simple physics and simple physiology. Pay attention to the energies you engage in. If you look at your original nature as a being called love, the newborn, no other quality of energy belongs in your field. If you put it there, it's off the mark. You're going to self-destruct. And, in fact, the patterns that have developed as your physiology and your persona are rooted in generations and generations of energies. And many of those energies are off the mark. And so in the process of healing and bringing forward our full humanness, which is the active presence of love, in that process we're going to get to face every hostility and fear that we've never dealt with. And one of the reasons why this process, which is in essence called healing, one of the reasons why this process is not very popular is because most people don't want to look at that stuff in themselves. Most people don't want to deal with it. They would rather die. They would rather drug themselves with prescription drugs, with junk food, with hostility, with fear, with behaviors that create such sensation, such strong sensations that they don't feel the subtler things that are going on inside of them until they break up and really explode. And when one engages in this work of being empowered as a creator, explosions don't happen anymore. You're in charge of your field. You deal with yourself in a way that comes from love. You deal with others in a way that comes from love. And when you do that, you are a fully empowered and incarnated human being. You know, if you look back into the ancient teachings, they talked about incarnation. And the incarnation was about we, as beings of love, showing up in our own physiology in our world, no matter how crazy it is. And a real, true creator is not dependent on circumstance or activity outside themselves for their state of being. Those who are in weakness and don't know themselves as creators are always blaming others, always blaming somebody else. The language of the culture is, you made me sad, you made me angry, you made me afraid, you made me this, you made me that. And it's time for us to wake up as the powerful spiritual beings that we are and bring our power forward. And always, 100% of the time, when one is in that power comes forward as love. Any question or comment before we go into the last segment of our presentation? If so, unmute yourself with a *6, and after you ask your question or make your comment, please mute yourself again so we'll have a silent recording.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, who are you?
This is Lennar.
Hello, Lennar. Welcome.
Yes. So I'm so glad to be here. This is like a refresher course for me. I was so happy to hear what you said about the students in the school, because you remember I taught, you may not, I taught 5th grade.
I do remember, yes.
Yeah, and I used those, the principles, I used the commitment for children. The children would say the commitment, and I would say the adult commitment to them, and it really did make a difference in my classroom. It really did.
That's exciting and wonderful. And by the way, for those who might not know, that commitment and the children's commitment and Who Am I are all on our website, free. You can just go down there and download it, and that's www.whyagain.com, WHYAGAIN, and that's where you can download the worksheet and the chapter of the book. Actually, you can download my whole book, Why Is This Happening to Me Again, in several different languages. So do you have a question or a thought?
No, I just wanted to, let you know I was here, to say for me this is a great review of, the Why Again training that I did. When was that? Back in the 90s.
Right.
Yeah, so thank you so much. This is really great. Like I said, it's a refresher, a reminder. And yes, I'm doing after-school tutoring now, and yes, I use it, and I really, no accidents in the universe. So I really got, for me to do a couple of teachings to deal with my fear that I have for these students that I'm working with now who, in reading, didn't recognize the word money was money. I mean, it's 5th grade. And TOWN is town, and DUNK is dunk, and a lot of them are males, of African descent, and so that really, I'm scared for them. So I need to deal with that for myself. So that was a great reminder. Take out my seat.
I join you in healing that fear and creating a space where we can bring change there and really, truly educate, which, of course, that word in its original essence, educare, means to draw out. It doesn't mean to put in. And by the way, for anybody else who might want to tap in, if you go to our website, it's the 11th, I believe, that we're doing our radio interview with you. You've got a radio show on the web, and anybody that wants to tap in will be doing that interview around the commitment and relationships with Valentine's Day coming up. So if anybody wants to tap in, there's a flyer on our website they can look at and do that.
Thank you for mentioning it.
Cool. Blessings. Have the best year yet of your eternal life, young lady.
Absolutely, and you're included in that. Thank you.
I accept. Take care. Bye-bye. Any questions or thoughts?
Michael?
Yes.
Hi, Michael. This is Paul over in Tampa. We're just curious when the next visit might be for you out here.
When we're going to be in Tampa? Actually, we're planning next winter.
Oh, okay.
We'll be doing a Florida tour. At least at this point, that's what we've tentatively planned, is to be in Florida next winter.
Wonderful.
But if you've got a specific venue in mind, email us and we'll make sure to get it on the schedule.
Well, thank you. That's wonderful. Look
All
forward
right,
to it.
delighted. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Well,
the last section that I want to touch into is to look at how this impacts our relationship, this game of pretending you're not responsible, of denial and suppressing or hiding parts of your mind, and then, in particular, putting those parts of your mind into your brain's image of your partner, the people around you. And let me just set the stage. Imagine that you're in the audience as Jeannie and I, my wife, are making this presentation, and we'll stand in the front of the room and we'll demonstrate how when we meet, of course, we each have our bags of garbage, and I'll stand there with my heavy bag of garbage over my shoulder, keeping it hidden, and Jeannie will stand there with her tiny little bag of garbage, displaying it to the audience and how small it is. But anyway, so we each have our bags of garbage, and of course we, in relationship, go along and everything is wonderful until our partner triggers our garbage. And what we demonstrate in our workshop is that once that garbage is triggered, what the average person does is makes a carbon copy of their garbage and tries to force it into their partner's bag. And the way that they do that is, you made me afraid. We call that projection language. The minute you start giving the power to someone else to cause something to happen in you, you've given away your creatorship. And if they buy into it, if I, let's say Jeannie gives me the look and I have fear and I say, you really frighten me, if she buys into that, she takes my garbage of fear and literally puts a carbon copy of it in her bag, and her bag is heavier. And of course she will tend to have, because relationships oftentimes are based in matching bags of garbage, will draw people to us that will show us the parts of us that we need to heal. And we do that through a principle of resonance. You can't get away from it. You might as well face it head on and move through it, because notice, no matter how many times you've taken the geographic tour, gotten rid of somebody, or gone to the other side of the country, there you are. It still shows up. So when we move out of projection language, when I stop saying, you made me afraid, Jeannie, and Jeannie stops saying, well, you made me angry with your fear, in essence, when she says that, she's putting some of her garbage into my bag if I buy it. When we actually step up to the plate and become adults and function as creators, if Jeannie gives me the look and that look brings up fear, I'm going to communicate in a way that I own my fear. And my communication is going to be, Jeannie, when you said thus and so, that really brought a lot of fear up in me. And I really love support and healing my fear. Would you help? And all of a sudden, instead of somebody to blame it on, I have somebody to support me in healing. And in the same situation, if Jeannie, instead of telling me how I make her angry, if Jeannie uses responsibility communication and says something along the lines of, yeah, Michael, and when you go into that fear, it really brings up a lot of anger in me, then she can see me as her support for healing her anger, because each of us is accessing directly the problem energy. And we're accessing it truly as it is in us by taking responsibility, by using responsibility communication. And so once we've finished that demonstration, and we stand in front of the room, and there I am looking into my bag of garbage as Jeannie is there to support me moving through my fear, and I'm there to support Jeannie moving through her anger. As a result of that conflicting situation that oftentimes contributes to the downgrade of relationships, the relationship is uplifted, because in each taking responsibility, we have the opportunity to throw out or forgive some of the things that have burdened us. And so when we face in relationships our conflicts consciously and utilize responsibility communication rather than a projection communication, then we have the opportunity to move forward in our relationship rather than move backward. Now, once we've done that presentation in a workshop, the next question we'll ask, and it always elicits and hilarious laughter, is, now, how many here were brought up in a home, have ever seen a movie, seen a television show, watched a play, read a book, where two people were in conflict, and one turned to the other and said, you know, when you said thus and so, that really brought a lot of fear up in me. Would you support me in healing my fear? And of course everybody laughs because it's unheard of in our culture. Our whole culture's language, and this is part of the atrocity that takes us out of creatorship. Remember, our topic today is the greatest atrocity committed against human beings. And that atrocity is we've been convinced that we're not creators. How do you surmount that obstacle? You start being responsible. First step. And the first key in that is you've got to let your mind show you the truth. Your mind's realities are always based upon the words you speak. When you speak words, you made me angry, the mind has to show you a reality that someone else is responsible for what's going on in you. That's called projection communication. When you utilize responsibility communication, and that looks like, you know, when you said thus and so, that brought anger up for me. I'd really love support in healing my anger. The evidential mind can shift what it shows you, and you can start to see yourself as the creator of your anger or your fear or your sadness or your grief or your rage or your peace and your well-being. And everything starts to shift. You start to be able to see the energies that need to be undone in you, that is forgiven in you, in order to be alleviated of the burden of those energies that are off the mark. Guess what? You get healthier. Areas where perhaps you've had difficulty producing wealth, they'll be the areas where you hold those blocks and those things that you've denied. All of a sudden, when you use responsibility communication and you start to access those parts of your mind that have been previously suppressed, wealth opens up, well-being opens up, joy, aliveness, empowerment opens up. And all of a sudden, enemies start to disappear. And we're able to move forward with that vision that Hub holds for everyone on the planet, and that is one of total and complete abundance, aliveness, and joy. Because the truth is, we live in a world where there's enough for everybody to have it all. But as long as we're pretending that somebody else is responsible, we're not able to create it. And that's where the Hub vision takes us, and that's where, as members of Humanity Unites Brilliance, we want to go. And we've got about 3 minutes left, and so if anyone has any questions about refining any of the ideas that have been presented, or if there are any pieces that are missing for you, I'd love to hear from you and see if we can fill them in before we complete.
Hi, Michael?
Yes.
Hi, Michael. It's Allie.
Hi, Allie.
I'm sorry. I wanted to ask, because in regard to the partner supporting the other partner,
right.
I mean, let me come from a more sound place. When I go into my stuff and it comes up, I can acknowledge that I'm in my stuff, and I really am not sure what Marty can do to help me,
right.
Except that he allows the space for me to deal with whatever I need to deal with. He backs off. Is that what?
Well, you know, there are a whole series of tools that we teach. We've got about 15 different workshops that we do, and each workshop provides a different tool. For instance, one of them is communication. Did you hear what I said? It teaches a responsibility communication tool. So what you might do is decide, in this situation where my stuff is up, we go into responsibility communication. Or as Lenore said when she called earlier, she used the commitment with the children in her school. So you might step into the commitment. I promise to trust you enough, to tell you the truth, to be sweetness in your life, to be there for you and with you. So you might go into the commitment. You might sit down with your partner's support and do a worksheet. And you might find that your partner on occasion isn't interested in supporting you. And we have tools for doing that too. That you do this because you want to heal whatever's going on in the people around you. Of course, it's a lot more fun if you're with people who are interested in and willing to support you. But even if they're not, of course, then you start looking personally at the issue of, why am I in a situation where I'm not inspiring support? And you get to do another piece of your work and clean up another part of your genetics. Next week in our call, we're going to talk about genetic healing. And we'll see that these issues actually move from generation to generation to generation. And that's why they sometimes seem so huge and insurmountable. Does that address your question, Alan?
Absolutely, it did. It was a great reminder. I didn't realize how blocked I was. Thanks so much, Michael.
Yeah, it takes continuing your work, doesn't it? It's an ongoing process, and when you realize, in the ancient Aramaic they said the sins of the father will be passed into 3 and 4 generations. That wasn't a threat, and this is kind of an introduction to our process next week with genetic healing. That wasn't a threat. That was just telling you how your genetics work. That literally on an energetic level, you have in you the patterns of every generation that went before you. And that what you're really facing, if you're going to truly step into your creatorship, is undoing and forgiving those patterns so that you can step forward into creation and as a creator. And of course, again, that's what Hub is committed to doing, is delivering globally the idea that we are creators and we can create a peaceful world where there's enough for everybody to have it all.
Well, that's excellent. I'm so looking forward to that one.
Cool. All right, well, love and blessings, and everyone on the call, please have the best year yet of your eternal lives, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Saturday. Remember that the final Saturday, the 5th one, will be at either 12 or 12:30 California time, Pacific time, and it will come to you live from the Hub Conference in San Diego. Love and blessings to everyone. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.